So, teenagers aren't trying to drive you crazy. Their brains are literally wired for risk and independence. In this episode, we'll explore how to guide them through it without losing your connection. Today, I'm joined by Kim Muench, a certified parent coach, author, a mother of 5, and the founder of Real Life Parent Guide, to explore parenting strategies that will help you better understand and support your teenage children. Welcome to All About You. I'm Dr Shauna Watts, GP and women's health advocate. Each week, I bring you evidence-based conversations to support women in midlife. Today, we're talking about parenting teenagers, those messy, confusing high school years where boundaries get tested and tempers can flare. My guest is Kim Muench, a certified parent coach, author, mother of 5, and the founder of Real Life Parent Guide, specializing in helping parents of emerging adults. Kim is also a mum herself to 5 now adult children, so she understands firsthand the roller coaster of emotions that comes with watching your kids pull away, test boundaries, and step into independence. She's also the author of Becoming Me While Raising You, which became an Amazon #1 new release in the parent and adult child relationships category. You might have seen Kim on Fox News Radio, TV news segments, or podcasts all around the world, where she shares her mission to spread a movement of parenting with our children rather than over them. By the end of this episode, you'll understand teenage development and how it can literally feel like your teen has become a different person overnight, how to approach tricky but crucial conversations about school, sex, and mental health, the importance of open and honest communication when it comes to things like social media, porn, and alcohol. Remember, this is general information only, not personal medical advice. Always consult your own healthcare provider for guidance. Kim, thank you so much for joining me. I know it's evening time for you, but welcome to the podcast.
I am very excited to be here talking with you, Dr. Shauna. I'm looking forward to all the things that we're going to talk about.
Kim, I would love you to introduce yourself to our audience and tell them a little bit about you and how you have ended up with such a great following of people looking to you for advice.
So, I am the mother of 5 now adults. And to give you the very high overview, I had my first son when I was 18 years old. And I had a very traditional mother father. I was the oldest of 3 upbringing, private school, middle class neighborhood kind of upbringing. And I ended up getting pregnant in my freshman year of college. So, as a result of that, my parents asked me to leave home. So I navigated becoming a single mom and living on my own at the age of 18, which was challenging for sure, but one of the ways that I really grew up quickly. I had my son and I stayed with his dad for the first couple of years, but it was an emotionally abusive and then physically abusive relationship. So I knew I couldn't stay in the relationship, but of course we were going to have to co-parent my son, the rest of his through his childhood. So, shortly thereafter, I did meet and date and marry my now husband. We've been married 33 years and have 4 children together. So, my oldest son went between 2 very different homes, very different cultures, very different sets of rules, and all of that. During his teen years, he struggled with some anxiety and depression. I didn't know much about it, but of course, as any good mom would do, I tried to get him into a counselor and all the things that, that parents do. Unfortunately, at the age of 20, we weren't living together at the time. We had moved several states away, but my son called me and said, "Mom, I haven't I don't remember the last 3 days of my life. I've been on an alcohol binge. This isn't the first time and I need help." And I knew as a mother that there was something going on because I would call him to check in and he would not call me back for days. And I just, your mom gut, right? So, very quickly, I understood the depths of his addiction to alcohol, and that was indeed to quell some major anxiety, depression. He had OCD as well. So, for the next couple of years, it was kind of a battle to help him find long term sobriety. By the time he was 22, he was on a path for that, and I decided to go back to college at that point and wanted to pursue becoming an addiction counselor for teenagers. I figured I went through this experience for this reason, and as I finished my college degree, finished the state certification that I needed to, in order to become this licensed chemical dependency counselor, along the way, I had to do some internship hours. And I realized in working with teenagers, this is not where I was meant to be, because teenagers and these emerging adults that I worked with did not think that they had a problem. But part of my job was to educate and support parents whose kids were in the program. And that's where I really fell in love with, I've been through this and I think I can support parents in this. So, through the magic of social media, I learned that there was a program to become a parent coach. So I went through that certification in 2016. And since that time, I have focused on working with parents of adolescents. So I started with working middle school, high school parents. And then again, through the magic of social media, oddly enough, starting in 2021, I was sharing my story of walking through addiction with my 20-year-old son. And what continued to come back to me were these parents of 18 to 25-year-olds who were struggling with mental health, didn't want to grow up, failing to launch, as they say. And so I, for the last 3 or 4 years at this point, have worked exclusively with parents of 18 to 30-year-olds who have mental health and substance use issues. I didn't even think that there would be a parent coach for this age group. Like I didn't think that was something that we would need. But in part, I think because of COVID and phones and a number of other things that I know we're going to talk about during this episode, that has become a real need. So now I work with parents of 18 and older to help them shift the parenting dynamic and shift the approach, which I'm sure we'll talk about as well.
Amazing. So I hope you don't mind. I know as a mum of four myself, and you've got five, you've been through all the stages. I would love us to start and think about the teenage brain and what's going on, and then we'll kind of work our way through, and eventually we're going to get to talking about these young adults that you have now ended up sort of specializing. And the great thing is that our audience are these parents, so we've got an audience who are absolutely dying to know how to navigate all the things that seem to be coming up. One of the things that I certainly hear as a doctor all the time, and even among my friends, so my youngest is currently 14, and lots of my friends, mum friends, will say that they literally feel that their teen sort of changes overnight. They feel like, they often can date it back. Like, we were at a holiday a few weeks ago or a few months ago, and he was great or she was great. And now I'm dealing with all this attitude, and they won't do anything that I'm asking them to do, and they're just being so argumentative. Um, what is actually going on? Can we talk about
Well,
why is this person changing in front of our eyes?
Well, my understanding, and I'm not a doctor. I'm a certified parent coach. So, but my understanding, and I've really read a lot of research from like Dr. Dan Siegel and others who study that adolescent brain. My understanding is that all of their senses, like the five senses, are much more heightened during the preteen and teen years. So, a cupcake that we might find very tasty at my age of 57, or tastes that much better because things are heightened in their senses, in their emotional life during the teen years. So when we maybe make a joke about oh, the raging hormones or whatever, the reality is there is a great deal of change that is going on for them, especially on an emotional level. And it's important for parents to, I think, number one, it's important for parents to know that. because their emotions can be very up, very down. They're also, their biological clock in terms of their sleep is changing. So we often notice teens, want to stay up much later than they did when they were younger. And that can make them extremely crabby if they aren't getting enough, rest at night. And it can also lead to parents having to wake them up and all of that kind of behavior. So I guess what I want parents to take away from this question is the emotional life of teenagers can be very up and down, and it is not surprising at all. In fact, I would say quite normal for a parent to say, my kid went upstairs, to bed one night one way and came downstairs a totally different person. That is part of what it is to have an adolescent in your home. I'm sure you can agree.
Absolutely. And a lot of my listeners are navigating things like perimenopause and menopause and are having their own emotional, at times, I suppose, dysregulation. They're feeling irritable, they're not sleeping well, and then they're having to navigate all these other big emotions in their house, and it can feel really hard. And one of the things that a lot of my, again, patients and mum friends all tell me is that they find it really hard not to take their teens' behavior personally. Like it feels really hurtful. They can feel like, I suppose they're feeling like I had one friend and she said, I'm living with a mean girl. I feel like my daughter is a mean girl to me because her daughter will just say such mean things, and she can't believe that this girl who, not that long before used to sit on her lap and, cuddle her is now seeming to feel such anger and irritability. And it's hard to reframe it so that it doesn't become a battle of wills and a battle of, that they don't like you anymore and that it all escalates. How do you help people understand and navigate that part?
Yeah, that is a great question. And one thing I know for sure as a mom of five myself, and, as someone who coaches parents on a regular basis, is how important it is not to take things personally. Because again, their moods are shifting and they can be, unpredictably emotional at times. That doesn't mean it's okay and we give them permission to be disrespectful. What I have found is that when I treat my children, and during the teen years, when I treated them with respect, with calm myself, of course, it is more easily, it's easier to get them to come back to being regulated if you can stay calm. And I 100% think it is crazy that most women are going through perimenopause or menopause when they're also going through the teen years. I mean, talk about, a double whammy. And some parents are, even dealing with their parents who may be aging and whatnot. So it can be a lot that's going on, which is why I tell my parents, like, you are the emotional barometer in your family. I mean, I truly believe that, especially moms, not that dads don't have a vibe that they're putting out into the family too, but mothers are the emotional, really the barometer. And when they're super anxious, stressed, not taking care of themselves, of their emotional needs, getting the sleep that they need to get, it it ripples out into the family, right? I mean, it really it moms s- for a lot of reasons set the tone. That being said, when your son or daughter does say something that you are tending to take personally, I would get curious about what they're saying and why they're saying it. Teens or it doesn't matter how old our kids are, their behavior is trying to tell us something. It's trying to get an emotional need met, and that could be the need for acceptance or affection or appreciation or attention, connection. Their behavior is trying to tell us something. So, as a parent myself and as a coach, I often tell parents, I need you to become an observer of yourself and of your son or daughter. I need you to be thinking about and put on your detective hat. Why is this, coming at me? And is it about me? Because a lot of times, quite frankly, it's not even about the parent.
Yeah, 100%. And I know that you talk a lot about trying to maintain connection rather than control. But yet I think human nature and sometimes mums, and I will say that I'm definitely guilty of this at times, is that whenever something feels out of your control, when you've usually controlled, your child's timetable and their activities and what they're going to eat and when they're going to eat and when they're going to go to bed, and then suddenly that feels it can make people either go one way or the other, where they can kind of relax and go with it, and they want to avoid the arguments, or they can go the other way and they can become even more controlling and, you know, tracking phones and doing all sorts of things and checking, sneakily checking messages on phones and reading mobiles and all sorts of things. And, there's pros and cons, and I respect people can make their own decisions. But how do we resist the urge to become even more controlling? Because I think that can lead to an even more of a backlash.
Right. We know that parenting from fear or anxiety or the anxious chatter in the head of all the worries that, are constantly going around in the mind, breeds parenting from fear essentially, and breeds disconnection and the desire to control. So trying to come from a place of love and connection takes a lot of intentionality, because I think what happens is parents become triggered, right? Their kids are they heard like everyone else in the news that, there's all these dangers, or, we need to be tracking our kids and stuff like that. And again, every parent needs to find their find their comfort level with how much they're checking texts and how much they're tracking and whatnot. Um, but I think that when we come from a place of distrust, our kids learn and somehow actually think it can breed like more of sneaky behavior, because the parent isn't trusting them. And the kids kind of like, I'm not doing anything wrong. But then they get to a place where it's like, you know what? You don't believe me and question me about everything anyway. So to develop a mutually trusted relationship, parents have to continue. I think during the teen years, this what happens is parents start to really worry about the future and whether or not their son or daughter is going to be prepared for the future and checking all the boxes, right? We as parents, we tend to like, okay, this is like serious. You're now in high school and we got to make sure that you got the right grades so that you can get into university and all the other things. And they're so focused on that that they sometimes forget about continuing to build and develop the relationship with their kids. So I would ask parents, when was the last time you spent any time with your kids, your teens, where there was no agenda, no, why didn't you do this? Or where were you, at that? Can you work on just building a relationship and understanding who your son or daughter is and trying to meet them where they're at? Because I think the biggest help when it comes to risky behavior, whether it's dating or alcohol use or whatever, the biggest predictor of that potential happening is an unhealthy parent-child relationship. So, parents, you have to continue to work on building a close and trusted relationship with your sons and daughters during their teen years so that they know your family values, and they aren't more drawn than a typical, because there's gonna be some natural curiosity, but they aren't drawn into a crowd or, some of the risky behaviors that we don't want them to be drawn into.
And if we can just take that a step further in terms of, you know, how do you think the parents should approach these things? Should they tell stories of the worst case scenario of, the friend's son who ended up with an alcohol problem or a drug problem, or should they try and watch a documentary with their kids, or do they try and seem like they're more chilled and relaxed about it? Like, I think people actually are a bit at a loss as to how to actually approach this. I mean, do we have any evidence to tell us what to do?
Yeah, and that's a very good question. Here's what I know wouldn't work. I think trying to scare them, trying to threaten them with grounding them, taking a very authoritative or authoritarian type, stance on it. You won't do this, you won't do that, like that is the kind of thing that again is parenting from fear and breeds disconnection with them. I If there's an appropriate documentary, I think that that would be an amazing way to sit, watch together, talk about these things. I also think we have to start having these conversations about drugs, alcohol, pornography, other things much earlier than we want to be having them. But the reality is we need to be having tough conversations. And it's easier if you have a easygoing or open communication. You've already developed that with your son or daughter. It makes it a lot more difficult if you haven't had, good connection with them, and then to bring in a tough topic makes mom or dad probably a lot more uncomfortable. So, early and often talking through some of these tough topics. I don't know if it's a good idea for parents, quite frankly, to like say to share like their own grim experience with things. I don't know that that is, a helpful thing, or to say, "Well, look what happened to, Mary's son, blah, blah," that kind of thing. I do think that that it can be helpful. I'm not saying don't do it. I'm just saying I love the idea of sitting down, watching a documentary, and talking it through and talking about, like, what questions do you have, or making it a normal, regular topic of conversation is important.
And I think that's something that so many parents find so hard because we're, of course, shaped by our upbringing and how things were spoken to us about. And some people have, their own upbringing, their own thoughts, their own culture, perhaps their own religious beliefs that make some of this stuff really challenging to navigate. And I think some parents just don't know where to start, so they just don't. But the reality, as you say, is that we know that kids as young as 10 and 11 are accessing pornography, and um and kind of no one's talking about it, or not very many people are talking about it or acknowledging it. And I think that a lot of parents would be very, very surprised by how much their 14 and 15-year-olds know and have seen in comparison to, if we think about people even 20 years ago or 10 years ago. I think the access to videos and short clips and TikToks and YouTube videos and what kids are getting to see means that, to be honest, sometimes they know more than their parents.
Mhm. Yeah, and as parents, we don't wanna think that, but it is not smart on our part to bury our heads in the sand, even if we didn't have an upbringing where our parents were comfortable. Most of us didn't have an upbringing where our parents were at ease and comfortable talking about it. I've always how I've looked at it, because I had those parents that weren't into, and I got pregnant at 18. How I've looked at it is, do I want social media or something on the screen to educate my kids, or do I want to be the one to educate them? And really, when I ask myself that question, I would much rather be uncomfortable for a little bit and have conversations that I thought I'd never have with my children, than for them to see firsthand online something that, they can't unsee and that they'll learn from. I'd rather have them learn from me. The other thing I wanna say is I think parents I think we were so busy in the raising of kids, myself included, when my kids were younger, is that we don't think about and really define our family values. I think one of what we can do really would be helpful is for parents to think about, what values are we trying to instill in our children? We have a vague idea, but I think having actual conversations and telling our kids what our family values are, so our decisions are made from our core family values. We value honesty. We value hard work. We value connection. These are our family values, and having regular conversation about how we make decisions from our family values, I think, can be Very helpful.
When I see women in the menopausal transition, I witness many symptoms, including poor sleep, hot flashes, dry skin, low libido, weight gain, brain fog, and many more. But more than that, I see women who feel like they've lost themselves, and they tell me, I don't feel like me anymore. As a doctor with 25 years experience, I knew I had to do something. I wanted to incorporate all the knowledge I'd accumulated over the years, mixed with the most up-to-date scientific studies, to create a program where I could help women thrive. My Rediscover You program incorporates all the pillars that I believe you need to make this the best era of your life. Our program gives you 16 weeks of doctor support, and with the help of other health professionals, we will work hard to help you with your nutrition and weight, optimize your hormone health, put you on the path to the right exercise program for this stage of life, prescribe a skincare plan specific to you, and of course, provide you with treatments to pamper and improve your skin. We know that right now you feel exhausted and overwhelmed. Why not let us be your guide? Our goal is to help you regain balance, confidence, and joy for life, and help you take back control. This program gives you a one-to-one tailored experience, meaning we can only have a maximum of 10 women inside the Rediscover You program. To learn more and apply, head to youbydrshaunawatts.com.au for everything you need to know, or click the link below in the show notes. So I know we've touched a little bit there on pornography, and I do get a lot of patients often asking my advice as to how to approach this and at what age to approach it, because of course some mums, I obviously see a lot of mums, and they'll often say to me that they're afraid of bringing it up and giving their child a curiosity about something that they haven't already come across. So they're not wanting to plant a seed, as it were. How would you sort of respond to that concern?
It's an unfortunate fact that they are having access to that. Doesn't mean everyone's accessing it, but I remember when my daughter was 9, she saw a video that a friend had on a phone. Even with if you as a parent are super careful and, have a lot of parameters and your kid doesn't have a phone and whatnot, there's an opportunity that they're gonna see something with a friend, or there's another parent that maybe isn't as careful, unfortunately. So I mean, I have heard that if you're and I'm not this is not one is not exactly the same as the other, but I'm gonna use this example. I have heard that if you are concerned that someone is, say, suicidal, that asking them if they're suicidal doesn't make them suicidal. I would say in the same vein, um, sharing with your children that you may come across something on the internet inadvertently. I would rather have you come and talk with me about it. I will not be angry with you, but it's possible that you will come across, something that makes you feel very uncomfortable, although it may be also very intriguing to watch. Right? You have to acknowledge that it might be something intriguing that they would wanna watch, but you also want to let them know, like, "I'm not gonna be angry with you. We're gonna use it as a teaching tool. So please do, come and talk to me about it if you come across this." I don't think you can tell kids, and here's the thing, our kids want us to they wanna please us. And we want them to know that we would rather use something they come across or some experience that they have that maybe we wish they wouldn't have had as an experience to build connection with us and talk through and use it as a learning lesson, as opposed to them feeling that we're going to be disappointed in them.
I love that. I think that's probably a really useful sentence that would be a real conversation starter. And I think it's a great way to guide parents who literally don't know where to start with the conversation. But I love that. So you might have watched something that made you feel uncomfortable, but you also might have been quite intrigued, or, wanted to watch more, and let's talk about it, rather than already telling the person off or shouting at them or telling them that they've done something wrong, because that's just going to, of course, drive that behavior to be more hidden and secretive. On the same vein, another conversation that I think parents struggle a lot with is having an open conversation about sex and relationships um, with their teens. And I think what people really struggle with is how are they going to have an open conversation about it, but still make it that it aligns with their family values, and also still practical and accepting that, perhaps their children have different ideas of how they want to live their life and pursue their relationships. Do you have any openers that you could help us with, or how to approach this with teens?
I think one of the best openers parents can have is just to be brutally honest. Listen, this is a difficult conversation for me to have with you, and it might be difficult for you on the receiving end of it, but that doesn't mean I'm not going to have it. And we really need to talk through and address, I don't know, sexual behavior or whatever it is. I think parents are afraid to be, and I'm not saying you should be overly vulnerable and share every feeling with your kids, but I think when you can be honest with them and let them know when something is difficult for you, it can you seem A, slightly more human, and B, they can appreciate that, yeah, it's difficult for you to talk to me about this, and they may not be comfortable at the time, but in hindsight, I bet that they will appreciate the fact that you were somewhat vulnerable and honest about how you're feeling. Sometimes parents, I think that we're always trying to have the right words or the right approach, and when parents will say, something very genuine, I will say, "That's exactly what you need to say to your kid." Like, just say that. Come speak from your heart.
Yeah, express your concerns in a gentle way that doesn't sort of shut down conversations. Um, and another thing that obviously parents are navigating is having conversations that perhaps are difficult to hear from their teen, which may be navigating their own sexuality or their own identity. I have had a few parents who have felt kind of really regretful in hindsight as to how they've handled those conversations. And I've also had very dear friends who I think have handled those conversations just so incredibly amazingly and been so loving and accepting of their teen. But you would think over the years that, perhaps we've got better at this, but I'm not sure if we have. Because it sometimes feels like people will be on the outside seeming like they're very accepting in theory, but whenever someone perhaps in their family doesn't quite align with what they'd expected and what their dream for their child was, perhaps they envisage their son marrying a girl and having children, and all of a sudden they're having to navigate a different um reality. um how do you coach parents working through that scenario?
Yeah, if you, I want to share just a short story and a quote that came to me one day when I was doing something very mundane, like I think I was vacuuming the house or something like that. But trust me, it's relevant. So, I wrote a book a while back about my own parenting journey, and I really had looked back into my childhood and really thought about, like, what beliefs did I take on in childhood that were playing out in unhealthy ways in my marriage and in my parenting. So that book came out in 2021, and the last page of the book is a quote that I think is really relevant here, and it is, "Our children come through us, not for us, except for the lessons they reflect to us during their journey in an effort to grow us up along the way." And so I will often say to parents, "What are you learning from the situation with your son or daughter?" Because I think that many parents go into this job feeling like it's their job, right, to mold, and they have an agenda for this human being that's come to them or come through them, when I believe that they have come to us and we're, yes, there to guide them and be their foundation, but we're not there to direct exactly what their future looks like. We need to they have their own blueprint, or they have their own rhythm or path that they're going to take. We're blessed to be guiding them and be coming up alongside of them, not to be directing them exactly where they're supposed to go. So, and it's there's a grief process, to be honest with you. As a personal experience, one of my sons has gone into a vocation, and a vocation where he cannot marry or have children, and I remember as a parent, when he told us he was going into seminary, that, like, I always thought he'd get married and have children, right? And he was choosing the one path in his life that he would never be able to do that. And for me, it was like a real loss, and I literally, like, grieved. So I know that parents, whether it's a career choice, a lifestyle choice, a sexuality, there are times when we as parents will grieve what we thought was going to, the path our child was going to take, or the path that we wanted them to take. But the reality is, they are not here for, to live out our agenda for them. They're here to live out their own agenda, whatever that is.
So true. And I think that, and I think we've all been guilty of this, is that sometimes, if our child is seen as the, intelligent and beautiful manners and well presented and the great sports person, we feel that that's such a reflection on us, and clearly, we're doing a great job. And also on the inverse side, if our child is gone off the rails or got into trouble or doing the wrong thing or is seen as the bad kid, again, we probably take on too much of the responsibility for that as well, and say, well, then clearly we're a terrible parent, and it's all been our fault, and we've obviously made endless mistakes, etc., etc. And I'm not saying that there isn't, of course there is truth, if someone hasn't had connection and support and been cared for and all the things, but I think that we're taking too much credit when they turn out amazingly, and then perhaps too much responsibility whenever things don't go the way they should or we want them to, because we had this preordained idea of that this was our really gifted child who was going to be the amazing sports person, or this was our really clever child who we thought was going to be a doctor or whatever. Do you think that there is an element of that with parents feeling like they, that they're kind of got this piece of, um, plasticine or dough that they can mold this person into how they want, but that's just not the reality?
Yes, 100%. And parents forget, yes, parents are a foundation. Parents do have a lot of influence. I think they have a lot more influence when they have good connection and open conversation and, a good rapport with their kids. But there is so much more influence on our kids, especially now, than ever, like, we do not know all the information, all the things that, as they're scrolling or as they're on the computer or whatever, we can have good parameters on there and still not know the kind of information they're being fed, what their peers are, the influence of their peers, the influence of the culture in general. All of these things play a part in, you know, how in the path that your child takes. It's not just parenting. Not to say parenting isn't incredibly important. It is, but what I'm saying is, when parents take too much credit for the good or responsibility for the bad, or the negative things that their kids are going through, part of this is things that, um, their son or daughter may be able to grow through. Like, for example, when I had my son at 18, I know my parents were hugely disappointed, and I was raised Catholic, and this was not the way, I made choices along the way, clearly, that put me in that position. But it was also that experience that really helped grow me up, and and a resilience and a grit that I don't know that I would have had I not walked through that very difficult experience and one my parents would never have wanted me, to have at that age.
Yeah, absolutely. And thank you for sharing that. Um, in terms of influences, we've obviously touched a little bit on social media and phones, and we all know that our teens often walk around, with their phone permanently in their hand or in their pocket, and they get to a phase where they seem to just be interested in their phone and their friends. And as parents, we don't seem to have to be much in the equation apart from whether they need some money or they need a lift to their friend's house or to do something. How do we navigate that? Because while of course we want to maintain connection, we can't really force the connection either.
True, true, but if parents there's no shortage of research at this point. So my oldest being 38 and youngest being 20, my son was, like, in his 20s before the first iPhone came out. My daughter got her phone in 6th grade, and that was only because everybody else had one, and I was not for it. But in the last, 5 to 7 years for sure, we have seen such an influx of mental health issues related to the phone, and I know that, people like Jonathan Haidt, who wrote The Anxious Generation, are out there advocating all the time for, different for using the phone in a more responsible way because we now have these late teens and 20 somethings that literally are not moving forward in their lives. Not all of them, but many of them. I am inundated with parents regularly who have 20 somethings that are spending hours and hours on their phone and aren't engaged in the real world. So, parents, while it may not be a popular thing, I think there definitely needs to be screen free time, screen free zones. And we have to get back to basics where maybe not every night during the week if kids have activities and stuff, but some of the basics that we've gotten away from are having dinner together as a family. Again, building those relationships where a phone is not part of that either for the parents or the kids. Parents, you have to model the behavior you wish to see. That's really part of it. And then, talking about what's healthy and what's not healthy. Kids with phones in their rooms overnight are not, sleeping, they're scrolling, they're talking to friends and things like that. Sleep is essential. So, to answer you, I mean, to long-winded answer to your question is, well, it is unpopular and it's not going to be an easy conversation. Parents working with their teens about having parameters around the phone and setting aside, family time to build those relationships is is paramount. We can't let teenagers control or have, be the empowered person in the house. Parents, you have to remember that you can be a leader, you can be a confident parent, you can be kind yet firm. You don't have to, be angry about it or be judgmental about things. Realize that the phone and the screen time is incredibly addictive, clearly, even for adults. So take that, appreciate that, but that doesn't mean don't set, hard and clear rules.
Yeah, you're so right. Because I was talking to a mum the other day, and she was telling me how she feels at this point, her daughter, who's I think 16 or 17, how she dictates the whole atmosphere in their home, that they're walking on eggshells. And then sometimes she comes out of her room and she's delightful and she might give them a little hug and they kind of feel like it's all good again. And then, literally a couple of hours later, the whole thing blows up and she's screaming and shouting and telling them to get out of her room, and it's all very difficult. And I think I don't know what it is that we've done with our generation of parents, but I feel like maybe there is some of us who are a little bit afraid of upsetting our kids or doing the wrong thing, and then we find ourselves going, oh god, what are we meant to do in this situation? No one has taught us what to do.
Yeah, here's what I think has happened. I'm Generation X, and I don't. Our parents did not have, like previous generations before me, didn't have the language or the emotional intelligence of understanding kids needing to have a range of feelings and to be validated for those feelings while also having healthy boundaries set. What happened is I think my generation had kids and didn't have the as much emotional support as they needed or wanted, and they swung the pendulum way too far with this generation of kids. That combined with screen time coming in and, it's just kind of a storm of a couple of things that have created this problem with Gen Z and Gen Alpha. And it's not gonna go away. My goal is to help parents correct and find that middle ground again. You have to be able to be an empowered parent, be a parent who comes to, the job with confidence. And confidence comes from educating yourself, from listening to podcasts like these, from reading good books, from talking to other parents, from being engaged as your kid is 16 as much as you were when they were 2 and 4, and really learning about this job. There's nothing more important than being a parent. And there's great books out there for parents in their 20s. I still read a lot of, books about parenting because it's important for me to continue to educate myself.
I think you're right. I think there's a generation of parents, and I definitely will include myself in this at times, of wanting to give your children everything that you didn't have. So perhaps you didn't grow up with a lot of money or a lot of things or a lot of opportunities or a lot of travel. And I think we're definitely have been a generation of parents who've, I don't know, we've probably overdone it really, and tried to micromanage and orchestrate every birthday and everything to be amazing and memorable and all the things. And I have to say, I've definitely even learned a lot of lessons looking back at things that I poured myself into and tried to make amazing. And I know at the time my children loved it, but right now they don't remember it. I remember it more than they do.
Yeah. Yeah, I do. Like I said, I think in some respects, we swung the pendulum too far. And there are parents now, to your point, where their son or daughter's emotional moodiness, whatever, dictates the whole, they are walking on eggshells. And that is actually a disservice to their son or daughter and to themselves. It's a disservice to the whole family.
Yeah, absolutely. Um, what about the age old, but everyone else is allowed to? You're so mean. You don't allow me to do this. Everyone else is allowed to do X, Y, or Z. Everyone else is allowed to drink alcohol. Everyone else's parents are so much more relaxed than you are. I think probably most parents have been told that, haven't they?
Sure, sure, and those parents that become very triggered by that and come back with, "Well, I'm not, so and so's parent. I'm your parent, and you're stuck with me," kind of, like that. It says to me the parent is very triggered and not comfortable in their own truth. Parents, you have to really, like, um sometimes you're gonna be the parent that is the only one that won't allow something, and you have to be okay with that. That's where you gotta be aligned with, what are my values? What are my personal values? What are the values that we're working to instill into our kids? They may or may not take those into adulthood, but while they're home, these are the values we're gonna be living around, and I'm clear with my values, and I'm gonna continue to, speak about them with my kids. You have to have a tough skin as a parent of a teenager. You have to have strong shoulders to sometimes bear the weight of your kid not liking you and not liking a decision that you're making. It's a sign of emotional maturity to be able to say to your son or daughter, "Listen, I appreciate that all the other kids get to drink and that I'm not going to allow you to go to that party this evening. Like, I get it. I know you're super pissed. Honestly, I hope someday you'll be able to understand it, but that's not gonna change the decision I'm making right now."
Yeah, 100%. And I think one of the other things that parents find tricky is that fine line of, some parents really want to be their child's friend. And some people, I have to say, I'm not into that. I would say I'm not your friend. I'm your mum. But I think there's definitely this blurred thing where sometimes I'll hear mum say to me, "Oh, my daughter's my best friend," or "She's my little best friend. I tell her everything." And I think, I don't know what your thoughts on that, but I don't think that's a good thing.
No, I mean, I think now that most of my kids, I have a daughter that's in college and the rest of them are out and kind of, I would say we have a very friendly, trusted relationship, but I don't know if I'll ever be friends with even my adult children. It's just, I don't know, that's not the nature of what I think the parent-child, even adult-child relationship should be, and certainly not during the teen years. Teens need parents who have a moral compass, who have a confident leadership, who come up alongside of them and want to guide them, especially as they, head out of their teen years into their 20s, that want to partner with them rather than parent over them, because that is something, the more you try and parent over, especially when they get to those teen years, you'll do this because I'm the parent, I said so kind of thing, the more pushback you're going to get, rather than there's a problem. How can we work on this problem together? How can we find a way to fix this together?
Yeah, absolutely. And it could be hard to know when to, I think sometimes parents want to come in and rescue all the time, but they need to have like, we need to let them learn from some natural consequences. Like, obviously, we don't want them to be putting their life or anyone else's in danger, but I think that, it is okay for for things to go wrong, or, to be honest, for someone to tell them off, or for them to have a consequence of doing the wrong thing at school, or, if they didn't do the assignment, well, then bad luck, you're going to have the consequences of that if you weren't organized enough to do it. But it can be really hard, and I do think that, again, our generation seem to want to rescue our children all the time, and I wonder that we're just not setting them up for success by doing that.
Well, I can tell you just by the fact that I work with parents around the globe that have 20 somethings that haven't had the experience of natural consequences, or haven't had the experience of going through something difficult because their parents have paved the way and made it, rescued them, fixed things or whatever. They're not resilient and don't have the kind of grit that sometimes is necessary in life. I mean, in so well, health and safety is one thing, right? We are not going to say, let the kid drive drunk because they'll find out what the natural consequences. We would never do that as a parent, because not only are we putting our own kid's life in jeopardy, but everybody else on the road. So when it comes to safety, parents do need to step in. When it comes to something like they didn't have their lunch and they're gonna be hungry that day, because you can't get there to give them a lunch or whatever, you can't bring their math book or whatever, those are natural consequences. The natural consequences are typically what's needed to teach the lesson that that they need to learn. Now, they may have to have that a couple of times before they truly understand it, but every time a parent jumps in and fixes or rescues, you take away that opportunity for them to learn.
Yeah, 100%. I also definitely feel that, particularly, well, probably because I just talk to more women, but a lot of mums will feel like they're losing their child as they become more independent. I think, as mums, we've felt needed for so long. We've been the trusted guide. We've been the everything. We've helped do everything, arrange everything, and suddenly our opinion doesn't seem to be so relevant anymore. How do you coach parents who are feeling that sense of loss?
Yeah. I mean, I think it's natural for parents to feel that way. I certainly, every time one of my kids went off into college or went, left the home for whatever reason, of course, there's a sense of loss. And I think that it's very natural for parents to feel that way. Um, it's a problem when it becomes too pervasive in the parents. I'll say to moms, there's actually a wonderful book. I think the author is Melissa Schultz, and the book is called From Mom to Me Again. And it's a very good book about, empty nesting and kids going off and redefining who you are. You can look at that one of two ways. I know that there are moms who look at that as like such a loss, and like my what's the word I'm looking for? My purpose is behind me. When you also then that was the whole point, right? That was the whole point, was to be to take this job and get them to a place where they didn't need you on a daily basis. So now you have to rediscover, who am I? Who am I? And it takes time, as someone who, is in the process of doing that myself at the moment. I am so honestly, I'm so grateful to have stepped into this just a few years ago and be really working at this and loving it, because I loved being a parent, and I've turned that into a business that I love by helping other parents.
Yeah, I love that. I think, a lot of my listeners are in that transition phase of life, working through perimenopause and menopause. Some of them are working through marital separation, changes of career, kids going off to college or university or moving out. And people can feel like, where am I and who am I? And I don't even recognize myself. They don't recognize maybe how they look. They're maybe not feeling the best on the inside or, mentally. And then they're navigating all of this. And I think for us, even just to speak to it and acknowledge it and say, like, lots of people definitely do feel a bit of a hollow in their chest, and they do feel sad that that era of their life has ended. But as you say, that's why we were doing it in the first place. That's why we kept these kids safe and fed them all the great food and tried to give them all these opportunities and ideas so that they could go on and do exactly what they're doing. But I think there's definitely a sadness there.
Yeah, it doesn't make it any less, like, I think it's natural to feel a loss, or to feel like, because gosh, that's such a chapter of your life, and really is an important chapter. And I think it's natural. I think that it should be allowed, right? If we want our kids to have a range of feelings and emotions, we have to be okay with our emotions that we're having too, while also taking some steps, to redefine again what is important to us, and how can I focus on myself now, because that is exactly what, that's an opportunity. To be able to look at that as an opportunity is, that's the mind shift that what one would want to have.
Here are my 3 takeaways from today's conversation with Kim Muench. Teen behaviour isn't personal, it's developmental. Hard conversations about sex, porn, mental health, and identity can feel daunting, but they are also the foundation for lifelong openness and resilience. Avoiding getting caught up in the heat of the moment, staying calm, and keeping communication lines open can go a long way. Thank you, Kim. Such powerful advice for parents navigating the high school years. You'll find resources and references from today's episode in the show notes. If this resonated, please follow the show, share it with a friend, and leave us a voice note at allaboutyoupod.com/voicemail. I'd love to hear your questions for future episodes. And remember, this information is general in nature and not intended to replace personalised medical advice. Always speak to your healthcare provider for guidance with your own situation. I'm Dr. Shauna Watts, and I'll see you next time on All About You.